I grew up in a deeply enmeshed family. And one thing I realized on my healing journey is that in order for me to see the progress that I truly wanted to see, I needed to decenter my mother. And not just my mother, but I also had to decenter my grandmother because my grandmother held the weight. She carried the stories, she birthed the family, she birthed generations. And in my family, her word was bond. If she felt that you should be doing A and you wanted to do B, then you were going to do A. And my mother grew up that way and she followed suit and she taught, or at least she tried to teach her children to do the same. And so once I realized that I didn't just need to decenter my mother, but I also needed to decenter my grandmother, I started to really see progress in my healing journey. And I wish that my mother had the opportunity to decenter her mother before she passed because I watched my mom make all of her life's decisions based on the thoughts and opinions of my grandmother, what my grandmother thought was best, where we should live, how we should move, how we should go. But on the flip side of that, my mother was also very dependent on my grandmother. And so for me, two things that I knew. I didn't want to be dependent on my mother. I didn't want to be dependent on anyone. But I definitely did not want to make my life's decisions based on how my mother felt. And I didn't want to be solely dependent on her. And so I had to learn how to decenter her. And then I had to learn how to decenter my grandmother as well. And in healing, what that looked like for me is when I started my therapy journey, and I talked about this in one of the very first episodes, I started my therapy journey talking about how the death of my father completely shifted my teenage years and my adult years, and how I had never really received the type of care that I needed in order to process his death at such a young age. But as I began to unpack my father's death, in the course of that, I realized that it wasn't my father's death that was impacting me the way that I thought it was. It was my mother's attitude, my mother's behavior, my mother's thoughts and opinions on how I should live my life. And because of the enmeshment, my mother and my grandmother were huge figures in our home, in our family. And my mom did not receive the mental care and the emotional care and the physical care that she needed to show up as the best mom that she could. She found herself in a situation where she was a single mom of six and she couldn't cope with that. And so all of what she was feeling and all of what she was dealing with and her lack of freedom and her lack of autonomy and her inability to think for herself and make decisions for herself and navigate life for herself greatly impacted me and how I showed up. And so that turned into me being a parentified eldest daughter, me taking on more responsibility than I should have as the oldest sibling, me not making moves and choices and decisions for my life because I centered my mother's thoughts and opinions. And so a good example of this is I wanted to move away for college. I had made up my mind. I knew since I was in seventh grade that I was moving away. I was going away to college. I wanted to leave the city of Chicago. I wanted to be as far as away from my family as possible. But I didn't. I stayed in the city. I commuted to school. I lived at home and I went to college in my city because of my mother's opinions. Because my mother thought that the school that I had made the decision to go to wasn't a good school. It was a party school, even though my mother never went to college. She didn't go to college. She knew people who went to college. My aunts and uncles went to college. I wanted to go to the same school that my step aunt and step uncle had went to. So she had only experienced college through the thoughts and opinions of other people. And I allowed her opinion to be so strong that it deterred me from moving away to live on campus and go to college. And for me, as frustrating as it was normal. right? Because she had allowed her mother to impact her decisions. And I've talked to my mom about this and I've asked her, why didn't you, one, why did you have all these children and you knew that you didn't have the capacity to take care of them? Two, why did you stay married to my stepfather for as long as you did? Three, why did you never move away? Why were we always living in the safety of my grandparents? And what she said was, it's just, she thought that she was doing the right thing. She thought that listening to her mom's advice and following her mom's rules were the right thing to do. And looking back on her life now, my mom's 56. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago. She realizes that she should have made decisions differently because she didn't realize the impact that her decisions were going to have on her children later on. And so, in order for me to show up as the woman that I wanted to show up as the mother that I wanted to be, I had to start to unpack that deep enmeshment. I had to start to unpack my mother's thoughts and opinions and her feelings and her emotions from my life. And it wasn't easy, right? It wasn't easy. And it really wasn't easy when it came to my grandmother because my grandmother has such an impact on my life that her opinions held weight. And I had to really start to take the time to unravel that deep enmeshment. I had to be honest with my mom and tell her, I cannot continue to live my life based on how you're feeling, right? You say that you love me, but if I am not navigating my life the way that you want me to, now you're not speaking to me. Now you're slamming doors and rolling your eyes. Now you're throwing tantrums, like a teenager some who needs some space and who needs some attention, right? And so once I had that conversation with her and I let her know that if you continue to act this way, it's going to impede on my healing and I'm not going to be able to continue this relationship with you. And I was shocked to realize that when I talked to my mom about this, she claims that she had no idea that she had been acting this way, right? She had no idea that this was her behavior and this is how her behavior was showing up in my life. And so once I realized that I don't want to navigate my life based on her thoughts and opinions anymore, and I'm going to start to center myself in everything that I do, I had to be honest with her and have that conversation with her. And I let her know, if you don't change your behaviors, I'm going to stop showing up. And then I gave her space to let her know, I accept you for how you are and the way that you are, but I do not have to interact with you. I do not have to continue this relationship with you if you cannot show up for me the way that I need you to show up for me. And if you can't, if you don't have the capacity and the tools to do so, that's okay. I just don't have to be around. We do not have to continue this relationship. And unfortunately, that's going to look like you not having a relationship with my child as well. It's unfortunate, but it is a big reality of what we're facing. And so after I had that conversation with my mom, and to be honest with you, it wasn't a conversation that we had one time. This has been multiple conversations over years, right? But once I started to notice that she was making a change, even if it was just a small change, then that allowed me to give her the grace and the space to continue our journey. But only if it was positively impacting me. Only if. And so my hope is that more women start to decenter their mothers, decenter their thoughts and opinions, realize that it might not necessarily be an easy journey, but there's tools and resources available, and you can take one step at a time and realize that your mother is human and her word is not final, that this is your life, and you don't want to look up and you're 50 plus years old and you have spent your entire life centering your mother, making decisions based on what your mother thinks. what her thoughts and opinions are of you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if she thinks that you're married to the wrong partner. It doesn't matter if she thinks you're in the wrong career. It doesn't matter if she thinks that you should have children or you shouldn't have children. Your mother's opinions of you don't matter. The only opinions that matter are the ones that you have of yourself.